I'm running off at the mouth and ain't nobody heard a word. So should I start over or what? So what should I do? Start over? All right. So if I was like a Japanese movie, my lips were moving, wasn't nothing lining up. So let me start over. And that is that we're here today to talk about the consent decree and the status of it. One of the things we talked about is we passed the baton to the new administration, and we were working with their transition team. And so we're working with their transition team, department by department, but we're also developing transition documents so that they know the status of each division and department, what's left, table need to be completed, all those kinds of things. Consent decree is one of the major issues. So we decided to hold a special presentation around that today. And we entered into the consent decree in 2015. Now, so that we could deal with some of the issues that we knew that we had to deal with within the Department of Safety, particularly the Division of Police. And we asked them to come in, and then we negotiated. And then we reached a settlement with them. And in that settlement, we then were obligated under that settlement preview of a federal judge to follow the consent decree with some timetables. And so what we began to do was hold, I think, weekly meetings. What we were going to do, and it became very apparent to me that that needed to be done. I could not chair those meetings. It was a major task. And so I worked with the law department and others to bring on someone who worked with the consent decree, all of our partners, Department of Justice, to monitor the courts and the police department to ensure that we were working in compliance and moving forward with the consent decree to me. And the person that we hired to do that is former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District. Also, I think was administrative judge, for a federal administrative judge. And so we picked Judge White to be that person. So today he will be outlining where we are, a status summary of it. Give you some indications as to what else needs to be done. And then after that, we will have question and answer. I have someone here from the law department. We have the chief, the safety director, myself will be available for questioning as well as Judge White. So I'm gonna turn it over to Judge White. Oh, and some of you may be wondering why I got a black eye. And if that's the case, let me just tell you that I had an eye procedure, and it actually is much better than it was because it was all closed and all black. Now I just have like a little circle under here and it's half closed, but I'm recovering, so I'm fine. So I'm gonna turn this over to Judge White. I'll be back up to take questions and answer, and those people I mentioned will be available for questions and answers too. Thank you. Judge.
I don't have any injuries or anything to report on. Sure, that looks good to me, Mayor. I don't know. So what I'm going to do today is briefly provide an overview of where we're at with the consent decree and kind of where we're going. This is a kind of a critical stage we're at right now, I think, and everybody would be probably in the presentation. We're moving from the issue of policy development and training and all those things into an area of assessment and a determination of whether or not, as a city, as the police department, we're able to comply with the policies, operate under them, and show that we're operating under them over time. As the monitor indicated, As we move into 2022, the focus transitions from developing policies to comprehensive assessments of the PD's capacity to implement the reforms in real time and to reach the required level of self-analysis and transparency. So it's about how we're performing now under the policies that when we're talking about a presentation outline, and you can see that on the screen, and these are basically all of the component parts that make up the city's compliance team for the consent decree. They're not listed in any particular order. However, I started with policy development and approval because that was kind of the major undertaking that we did in the beginning of this process. And it was that a major training, equipment and resources accountability, and down to data collection, which is a critical component of what we're doing right now, and end up with the tasks of what we have to do to get to compliance from where we're at. So I wanted to start with the policy development and approval. So you can see on the screen that some lists of some of the policies that were the compliance team at the police department, the monitor team, the DOJ, the community. There were lots of people that had input in these policies. But I just want to mention that initially that was a major undertaking, and addressing all the general police orders of the department and those that were required to be adopted or amended under the consent decree. So the compliance team had to study all the existing GPOs. They had to, what other police departments were doing to try to come up with the best practices to draft these policies and then to train on them. And beginning, the major undertaking that we undertook. And I can say that overall, the city and the police department made significant progress in developing these major policies and procedures, as well as delivered critical high-quality training. And that was not self-evaluation, but evaluation of those that witnessed that training, involving bias-free policing, crisis intervention, and search and seizure. And I think those are the most critical policies probably that affect the community out and about. The monitor team acknowledged that the data suggests that the men and women of the division are engaging meaningfully with the new policies and training as they do their basic work out on the street, because those are the ones that we worked on first. We adopted the best practices from across the nation, and many of the things that the communities were asking for in their police use of force policies over the course of the last year or two were already included in the use of the stats. Just I think is important to note, the use of force decreased 23% between 2019 and 2020. De-escalation, which is an officer's obligation to try to lower the temperature of a particular incident that he may be engaged in, he or she may be engaged in, as opposed to going right to the exercise of force. So that de-escalation from 89 in 2019 to 172 incidents in 2020. Firearm pointing, for instance, was down 34%. So all of that translates into fewer injuries for police officers and fewer injuries for people who are being that we have yet to work on. Some of them have been drafted. Some of them weren't even required to be adopted under the consent decree, like the interactions with youth. And that's something I know Chief Williams was very interested in. And so those policies have run through the community, through the DOJ and the monitor, and we're still have a couple more issues that we need to address there. Crisis intervention is, I think, one of the most, I guess, important areas of this consent decree, and one of the most successful that we've undertaken. I think the division made great strides in its approach to interacting with individuals experiencing behavioral issues. And generally speaking, from the monitor team and other national sources, the policies that have been adopted and trained on here are recognized as some of the strongest and most forward-thinking in the nation What we're doing here in crisis intervention is a national model. So we hired we appointed a crisis intervention team coordinator that's currently Captain James McPike. We have 5 officers assigned to that. One of the, I think, best examples of community interaction for the whole consent decree process has been the mental health advisory committee, which is part of the Adams board in a contract that we entered to. So they have helped us with writing those policies. They have helped us with training. And that's been a really good example of community collaboration. Those are officers that will receive a 40-hour special class in being able to respond to incidents. And in conjunction with that, we've started what we call the co-responder program. And that involves a specialized crisis intervention officer, along with a social worker assigned to a car that can respond to incidents and make sure that, and follow up on calls that might have occurred the day before, but to make sure that individuals are receiving the help that they need in those areas. We're certainly expanding our data collection. One of the things that I'm going to talk about a lot during the course of this presentation is data collection. And we have started collecting data on CIT incidents, crisis intervention incidents of dealing with individuals experiencing behavioral issues. And so that's allowing us to do some hardcore analysis of those calls, of what's causing that, and maybe help prevent those calls from being made in the future. So we're continuously training on this. It's an annual requirement. We're working currently on the 4-hour block of training for homelessness in 2022. And we're continually trying to develop our analysis of the data that we're collecting. So we're very grateful for the Adams Board and the Mental Health Resource Advisory Committee and all the training that has been developed and implemented. It's been a very successful part of the consent decree. I want to talk about training in general. That's been a bit of a roller coaster ride for us in this process. I think when initial evaluations of where the division was at in terms of training 6 years ago was that we needed to offer more and higher quality sessions. We needed to use scenario-based and adult learning techniques. We needed to engage in more group discussions. We needed to have student feedback and evaluations. And so what we have tried to do over the course of the last 5 years has been to increase the capacity of the training division to address these kinds of issues. A transition document that we're going to provide to everyone later. It's a more detailed explanation of what I'm offering you right now, but it's really amazing the amount of beginning with recruits and going through all the annual training that's required for use of force, community policing, bias-free policing, search and seizure issues. So the consent decree also provided for a training review committee, and I think it's all fair to say that committee, the use of that committee got off to a slow start, but I think that the renewed energy there and activating that committee, making it what it was intended to be, and using it to evaluate. We've also developed an online learning management system where we can offer continuous training to officers at different times of the day, where they can do this at their district office, not necessarily have to come downtown for that training process. So a lot of work still remains in training, but we feel confident of where the situation stands today. We still, as of next steps, as you can see, we are working with Tri-C to help us with our recruit training, our academy classes. We hope to do 4 do that by themselves, and so Tri-C has stepped up and helped provide that. And one of the other things that we're going to do is hire some professional help in how we develop our curriculum. The finance department has played an important role in this process, thing that how you track all of these things that are going on with the consent decree. And we start with the annual budgets of OPS, the PRB, the Police Review Board. So the Office of Professional Standards is that office that investigates civilian complaints against officers. The Police Review Board, the Civilian Police Review Board, is the board that hears the complaints that OPS investigates and determines to recommend or not discipline. I'm going to talk about them a little bit later to engage the community in the reform process, and the inspector general components of our compliance effort. So anyway, the finance has to track all that. They training related personnel. I would be one of those, the internal affairs superintendent. And then mainly every month they track the invoices that the monitor team submits. So next year, the full is probably going to be somewhere around 5.8 million. The monitor's budget is 1.1 million next year, which is a little more than it was last year. But as I'll talk about a little bit later, they have many assessments planned, which is going to be pretty labor intensive for them to do that. Of how we improve policing in Cleveland, how we keep the police department up to staff, how we get all of these other things done. So the recruitment team is made to ensure that the CDP, the police department, successfully attracts and hires a diverse group of qualified individuals. Recruiting team, which includes both the police, all the police department, the fire department, and the emergency management system. The team consists of 5 or 6 individuals. It's headed by a member of the Cleveland Police Department, but again, qualified individuals. They create and maintain sustained community relationships that would help to break barriers in terms of trying to recruit people to become members of the department. And they use the best practices. One of the things that has been accomplished here since 63 patrol officers in the city of Cleveland have conducted 14 police academies over the course of that time. So that's a significant achievement. We've also enhanced our application process. You can see on the screen an application and testing system to make application and screening of candidates easier. By no means where we need to be in terms of recruiting. I think nationally, to recruit individuals who want to be in police work. So we have to overcome some of those hurdles. COVID-19, I can mention that on a couple of areas here, but in terms of recruiting and visiting barber shops, and it's kind of dictated that we move more into the social media and other areas. But you can see in the overall compliance report, there'll be a link to the recruitment team's annual report and see all the equipment and resources. That is another very expensive and very time-consuming area for the city. The picture was pretty bleak as far as what the systems for the police department, hardware, software, what the computer bleak picture. Not to mention the fleet of aging vehicles that were being used to patrol the streets. So the first thing that happened from the equipment resource standpoint is that the IT strategic plan and equipment resource plan. The equipment resource plan was developed in 2017. The strategic IT plan developed. We've made some major investments in 3 specific areas, and I want to just touch on those briefly if I can. Modernization. That was $4,900,000 about dollars that were spent on records management system, on field-based reporting, having computerized field-based reporting in cars, in zone cars, and another 9 million plus to refresh the PCs across the district and to provide more of those in-car computers. There was also a 5-year, 225 marked car vehicle refresh program. The last 45 cars of those were budgeted for this year, but will be delivered in 2022. So we've replaced 225 of the zone cars. Strategic plan in time, and that would include the 5-year refreshes on the PCs, but also a refresh of our body camera systems. And one of that's been a very successful patrol officers. There's also a taser refresh that's about $4.5 million that's currently in place. And recently, smartphones have been deployed to all of the zone cars. It's been a very expensive process. It's not just throwing money at something, it's providing real their jobs on the street. That is a continuing effort. It's going to be continually evaluated, and we are pretty excited. Accountability is another major area. Of course, that includes several pieces and parts. The first one you see on the screen there is the Internal Affairs Department within the division. The Internal Affairs does all criminal investigations against officers. It does internal complaints of misconduct, the non-deadly use of major use of force incidents and their FIT team, and I handle the administrative investigations associated with those, which would include policy issues, et cetera, involved. So the consent decree requires that the superintendent be a civilian. We hired a superintendent. That person has now, Ron Bakeman has now vacant, and you can see down in the next steps that hiring the inspector general or the superintendent of internal affairs is important. A lot of work went into that, developing the manual for how these investigations are conducted, efficiently investigate any matter that comes before internal affairs, and make sure that the conclusions that are reached are supported by a preponderance of the evidence. The Officer of Inspector General, we had filled that with us for a couple of years, and his job was to review and audit policies and practices of the division to determine whether or not the investigations are met with the conclusions being a preponderance of the evidence, et cetera. While the Inspector General was on or so reports, you can see a list of those in the compliance document also, but some of the more important ones I think would include an Alabama-oriented policing policy and the current pursuit policy within the division. As many of you already know, Sheriff Violent now has left for the IG position, as a position that we need to fill as soon as after the first of the year as we can. Discipline, I know that's a major area of public concern. So on the disciplinary matrix, which is the policy that establishes and the presumptive ranges and establishes what aggravating factors and mitigating factors may be involved. That's an ongoing process. That's the next steps of being reviewed right now. We certainly have added staff to, which is the office responsible for organizing and scheduling disciplinary hearings. And the goal there is to have timely hearings, which is only fair to everybody involved, including the officers. And I think we here. The other thing we have done is revamp the disciplinary letters. A lot of discussion about what needed to be included in those letters. But I think that the rationale at a higher level than previously. We also have what we have called the Force Review Board, the FRB. And that's the quality control uses of force to determine whether or not the officers acted within policy, to determine whether or not there are tactic issues or training issues or policy issues that need to be addressed. So That's the area where we have a quality control of our use of force investigation. And the Inspector General is critical for what needs to be done in next year. Policing is one of the main pillars of the consent decree, and it's a priority for the department. I know for the mayor, for the chief, that we engage as one of the main tenets of the consent decree. So what has been done is that we worked very hard and long to develop a community problem general police order that is associated with that. But in essence, it's how we promote community partnerships and proactively address the crime, fear of crime, social disorder, et cetera. So we are engaged in that. Obviously, that's another area that the pandemic meetings we can hold, how many community meetings are being held anywhere in the city, and how the department can become involved in that. We've also developed data, and you mentioned data many times during the course of this presentation, because that's the critical stage that we're at now. So we're trying to collect the data on community engagement. We're soon going to be able to collect data on community and problem-oriented policing. With the goal in the plans is to have each officer, each patrol officer in the city devote determine that and enforce that if we have the data to back it up in terms of how people are doing that. So the training on the community and problem-oriented policing will be completed. The forms have been completed, and hopefully we're going to be able to have a data-driven evaluation. We also want to mention the district police committees, and of course Cleveland has a long history of engaging the community with their police department. I think one of the oldest programs in the nation, 75 years or something like that, that COVID is also kind of entwined in that, is how do we grow the district police committees, and how do we get them to interact with the CPC and others? And so, that's the effort that is going to be made going forward. And in Bureau of Community Services is engaging with the Community Police Commission in a working group in order, and along with the district police committee chairmen themselves, and trying to figure out a good way to grow participation in community involvement in the city. Public trust and confidence, constitutional effective policing, and it consisted of 13 members, a cross-section of the community. 3 of those members were representatives of the police department, and their job is to make recommendations primarily on policy. Been a lot of successes in that regard. Major recommendations on the general police orders related to community and problem-oriented policing, search and seizure, use of force, bias-free policing again. The disciplinary matrix has been worked on at the Community Police Commission. And the other success is reappointing the commission. It's constituting a selection panel, going through the selection process, the mayor making the appointments, and the council making some, which started in first appointed in 2015, a new commission in 2019, and then we've worked periodically to fill vacancies. CPC, the Community Police Commission, has not been without its bumps. Things that was done in order to avoid some conflict was to establish a schedule each year for how the GPOs are reviewed, so the Community Police Commission knows when they can make recommendations on a particular GPO. And when we have a mechanism in place now, thanks to Judge Oliver, I think that we can address that and make that process work more smoothly and effectively. Data collection. I've mentioned this several times during the course of the presentation, and to understand what this consent decree really provides in terms of what data do we need to collect and what do we need to do with it. So there are 400 data points under the consent decree that need to be touched upon. So there are data folks from the IT work to develop appropriate fields for this data collection system and the forms. That was phase one. Phase two was, once we got those forms in place, and it didn't happen all at one time. It was over a course of a period of time. It was then of it, and do the fields in the forms work. I mean, it's everything from are the dates correct? Are there misspellings? I mean, it's a mammoth undertaking. Then moving to phase three, the analysis and interpretation of data of compliance with the consent decree. The PD, we hired a collection, a data coordinator, Dr. Rania Issa, who has been working very diligently within the division. We also contracted with the Case Western Reserve, the Gun Center. You can see this timeline that has been presented here, and you get some kind of idea of where we're at. So the IA Pro Blue Team implementation in 2015, that's the system that tracks use of force and use of force investigation. So use of force report was generated by in 2018 in Q1, quarter one. Those are available on the website as well, and I think there's a link in the compliance document to that. We talk about the Brazos software. The CIT forms were deployed in 2020. Before we had those forms to electronically report on crisis intervention incidents, we did paper, and paper is very difficult to manage and to analyze. But from February to the end of 2020, there were 4,000 deployed stop forms. Now that's important to the community because those are the issues of stop and frisk, searches, warrantless arrest, any kind of stop in a vehicle stop in the city of Cleveland by the department. Those forms were deployed in July of 2021. We're still working through that process, but that could generate as many. It's extremely important for us to understand why people are being stopped, and if it involves a frisk or it involves a search, the requisite reasonable suspicion or probable cause has to be articulated in these reports, and that's how we measure. First quarter of 2022, I don't think we're going to make that Q4 this year. We're still developing the criteria and the curriculum, but that's next step, last step in terms of gathering data. And then we're going to, we have to prepare for a substantial influx of data and how we do that. So that involves expanding our data teams, both in the IT division as well as in the police department. And we've budgeted for 2 additional analysts this year in the police department to help with that. And so compliance status, but it's important to policing in terms of how we manage a department. the early intervention program. If there's a trigger met where an officer may need some kind of intervention, that would be disclosed by that data. Have the facilities and means to analyze it. So finally, the last is how we reach compliance and building data, and by building data class capacity remains. But we are entering a new phase now where we're moving away from policy development into this whole data and data analysis issue, and whether the police department is performing as required by the reforms in place over time, and there for 2 years. So we'll see how that goes, but at least we're in the phase now where we can start to establish that we have indeed reached that compliance plateau, and then demonstrate that we can maintain it. There were some preliminary assessments done by the monitor team, Office of Professional Standards, sustained investigations, and a use of force sampling where there were 145 cases reviewed. So again, not perfect, but the monitor team concluded preliminarily that they found the cases, the use of force cases is going to be a year filled with assessments. The monitor team has several that are planned, including more use of force evaluations, serious force investigations by our force investigation team, the force review board I mentioned earlier, internal affair investigations. We're going to assess several components have to be in place. One, we need to make sure that we understand exactly what the criteria is for reaching compliance. And that's something that will have to be worked through with the monitor team, as well as DOJ, to set clear targets for what we need to achieve in the long term. So we are certainly concerned about the volume of data. The monitor's agenda is very ambitious, and it's going to take a lot of concentration from the monitor team, DOJ, and the city to make sure that we can meaningfully comply with the consent decree. I do want to just say one thing in parting, that having gone through this process for the last 5 years or so, and getting to the point we're at now where it's not, again, developing policies and developing, but it's about, because in all truthfulness, I think that fresh eyes are in order right now in how this approach should be taken. But having said that, I certainly intend to be available to you, Mayor, and to the transition teams in terms of. So I appreciate the opportunity, Mayor, that you gave me to work with this great team that we have put together. I want to thank Mayor Jackson first and foremost. He never said no during the course of this process, and he and their staff, the finance team, Monica and Anthony, they also have been very receptive to what we needed. Chief Williams, Deputy Chief Joellen O'Neill, the compliance team. I talked to data team coordinator I mentioned, Dr. Issa, and the folks, Dr. Flannery and Rodney Thomas. The law department, I want to thank Law Director Lang Henry and Chief Counsel Singham during the course of the legal proceedings here in the consent decree. I appreciate his efforts. Public safety with Director Howard and Janet Nevels in recruiting, and Division of Information Technologies, Chief Phillips, Commissioner Roy Wilson. I needed something, which was a lot. Larry was there for me and answered the phone and took care of business. So many more to thank, but I think everybody's passed out in the room now that I've talked too long anyway, so I'm going to pass this back to the mayor.
Okay, well, thank you, Judge. I want to thank you for your service. You've done a significant and great job on getting us from where we were to where we are now. And we're passing this on to the next administration. So we'll be available for the public. Give you a minute or so.
There's a comment from Jeff Davidson. Everyone did such a great job. All of the obstructionists who got us nowhere got thanks. Remember, this was a 5-year process.
Work was for not. Is that it? Well, I thank you very much. And wait a minute, somebody
Yes.
finally got in under the.
Doug. Okay, so hi, I'm Doug, the civic reporter. Thank you for the presentation. One provision of issue 24 requires the law director to move the consent decree is about. Issue 24 gives the law director 30 days after the results were certified to do this. That deadline is December 22nd. Does the law director or someone from the law department intend to meet that deadline? If not, why?
Well, the question is, under the issue 24 chart amendment, law director is given 30 days to do something with the court. And even though I did not agree with issue 24.
Matt Richmond from Idea Stream Public Media. Will Mayor Jackson's administration submit a motion to amend the consent decree as required by issue 24 before leaving office?
Well,
if so, what parts of the new?
It's the same question, and they're saying that do we intend to go into court and comply with charter amendment before we leave office? I think we don't leave office to January, and the compliance date for that. So we intend to comply with the law.
Dan DeRose from WOIL. How long have the two positions been vacant, and has it impacted accountability?
Who wants the positions vacant in the county? He's assuming the Inspector General in Internal Affairs. Who wants the chief? You want to answer that, or you want to answer it?
Well, the positions have been vacant, I think, for maybe 6 posting, both of those positions. Reviewing applications, we did some interviews, but the problem was that we weren't getting a good response, and the assessment of that was because of this whole change in administration. So we decided that the best thing that we could do going forward for the new administration was to let them make the decision as to the inspector general